Greetings, everybody. Tēnā koutou katoa. It's great to be here. I'm only here really because of Cheryl. I don't know if you guys know how fortunate you are to have this kuia, but when she called me, I said I'd do anything. I'd even do it for free. So it's great to be here. I do work in marketing. I work in policy. I'm a psychologist and a sociologist. But I really fundamentally believe that the point of social science research is to make the world better, not just to understand it, right? So that's kind of my co-popper. I want to talk about social capital. I want to talk about loneliness. I want to actually talk for once about something that I really care deeply about, and I think you should care deeply about it too. I want to talk to you about social capital. Who knows what social capital is? Great, okay. Social capital is what binds us together. Social capital is that secret source that enables us to do as groups and communities things that we could never do as individuals. It's things like trust. It's things like feelings of security and safety. It's feelings of belonging. Social capital is critical for society well-being. It's critical for mental health well-being. It's even critical for economic resilience. Social capital is a lens through which we can understand so much about what's going on around us. It's a really, really interesting concept. The people that talk about social capital talk about it in three different ways. Social capital is what bonds you together with your tribe, however you want to describe your tribe, the people that you like to be with most. It enables you to bridge from your group of friends, your whānau, your tribe, to other groups. And it also links you to people that make decisions. So the more bonding capital we've got, the more bridging capital we've got, the more linking capital we've got, the better our societies can work, the better our communities can work, the healthier we'll be. It's all great stuff. Fortunately, when you talk about social capital, just about the only thing anybody's ever read about social capital is Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone. Anybody know this book? It's well worth reading. This is about the decline of social capital in capitalist societies. Right, what the hell is it that we're doing with the way that we're organizing our economies and our societies, which is undermining social capital? The idea now that what's actually happening, for instance, with sport, is that there's lots of individual informal sports. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but that on top of the decline of things like memberships of formal groups, church groups, other kinds of organizations, the fragmentation of people into isolation or into nuclear families has profound social and community impacts. We have a great program of work called Te Morio o Te Tahi. We've been running it for, near as makes no difference, a decade. And it started out as a way of tracing Christchurch o Te Tahi's recovery arc from the earthquakes. But it quickly became so much more than that. It basically became, and I can share with you summaries of some of this research, basically what the hell's really going on in the city? How do people feel about the city? Do people feel like they belong? Do people feel like they've been included in the narrative? Do they have a sense of Turanga Waiwai? What's going on? Here's some of the terrifying stuff that research tells you. Every year we do this research, between a quarter and a third of the residents in the greater Christchurch area tell us they think Christchurch was better before the earthquakes than it is today. Now, they don't mean that, right? With my psychological hat on, they don't literally mean that. But what they do mean is that they feel left out. That they feel that the direction of the city, the stories they're hearing in the city, don't include them. So that's a really interesting policy problem. That's not the one I want to talk to you about today. What I want to talk to you about is I was an interpersonal psychologist before I became a social psychologist, and that's a whole other thing, right? But one of the things that interpersonal psychologists know is that really successful relationships run on kind fibs, right? You know, that's how interpersonal relationships work. You know, you lie to people you love, little blue lies to hold the relationship together. There are also lies we tell ourselves to hold our community together. But when you examine some of those lies, those myths, they actually matter. So here's some. People in Christchurch are no more resilient than people from anywhere else in New Zealand. The idea that somehow the earthquakes, the mosque shooting, the fires made us resilient, no evidence that's the case. People in Christchurch are no more community-minded than people anywhere else in New Zealand. They're no more likely to volunteer their time. They're no more likely to donate money. They're no more active than anybody else in New Zealand. In fact, there's some really good research that shows the way we're building the city is undermining people's health rather than actually enabling people's health, right? So we're actually worse off in terms of we think we live here for the great outdoors. Actually, when you look at what people do with their time, you're much more likely to engage in the outdoors if you live in Auckland. Hurts my heart to say it. Finally, we're no more innovative than anybody else anywhere. So those stories we tell, none of those things make any sense. They're not true. This is true. When you think about social capital, you can think about things like safety and you can think about things like trust. You do not need to answer these questions yourself. But one of the questions we regularly ask people is, do you think in general that you can trust other people in Christchurch? Right? A quarter of people say no. Look around the room, right? A quarter of you, extrapolating, don't think you can trust other people in Christchurch. 56% of people, so well over half, say Christchurch is so unsafe that I never go out, ever, and leave my door unlocked. Never walk the dogs around the block. I never run to get a bottle of milk. I never do anything without locking my door. Most people, quarter of people say you can't trust other people in Christchurch. Half of people say Christchurch is so unsafe you would never go out with locking your door. Of course, people don't think their neighbourhoods are safe during the night time. We'll talk about that in a minute. But 3% of people, let's think about that. 3% of people, it's a significant number of people. It's a tiny fraction. But if you're thinking about 150,000 households in Christchurch, 3% of those households is a significant number. 3% of the households in our survey say, my neighbourhood's so unsafe I don't feel I can go out during the day. And then obviously, the figure goes right up at night time. 17% say my neighbourhood's so unsafe I can't go out at night time. We don't trust people and we don't feel safe. Depressed? Much? Let me get worse. It gets worse. This is the bit that really, really interests me. We then talk to people about their trust network. Tell me about the number of people you've got in your life that you can call and talk to when you feel lonely. 20% of people, and this is about right for the Western, well, it's not right, that's a terrible expression and phrase. This is about normal for modern Western economies. About a fifth of people say there's nobody I can talk to about intimate personal problems. If I have a problem, there's nobody online or in my life I can talk to. 18% say, I don't have a bunch of people I can call. We don't ask it like this, but the research essentially says, if by some strange twist of events you found yourself in handcuffs at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, how many people could you call? And about 15 to 20% of people say, there's nobody. If I found myself in handcuffs this time tomorrow morning, I don't know what I'd do. And then 15% of people say there's nobody I can turn to. Now, if this isn't you or anybody you know, that's great. But there's a significant minority of people in Christchurch who feel unsafe and feel they can't trust their neighbours and feel like there's nobody they can turn to for help. This sounds to me like a place where social capital is fraying. Because one of the things we know about community is it's incredibly fragile if you don't nurture it. I should have asked you this before I put the thing up. Okay, who here is over 30? Hands up. It says right, we're amongst friends. Okay, of those of you that are over 30, keep your hands up. How many of you think it's harder to make friends today than it was when you were 20? Right, okay. One of the things that happens as we age is it becomes harder for us to make friends. But that gets reflected then in the fact that we think other people are unfriendly. That's one of those interesting psychological phenomena where the specific becomes generalized. Interestingly, we do lots of work with migrant groups, and what migrant groups tell us is that Christchurch people are incredibly friendly and impossible to befriend. What they mean is Christchurch people will wave at you, they'll smile at you, they will have coffee with you, but they will never invite you to their house for dinner. Right? Very friendly, impossible to befriend. So this gets interesting, right? Because when you think about loneliness, you might be thinking that it's old people living on their own. And it is old people living on their own, but it's not only old people living on their own. In the United States, Pew Research Center, it's an unfortunate name, PEW, but they do amazing work, has discovered that it's the millennials in America who are the loneliest. To the extent that we have data in New Zealand, it is young people who are the loneliest. So young people in New Zealand are most likely to experience feelings of loneliness and isolation, despite being surrounded by other people at school or at university. So, this is where it takes an interesting turn. If you're an economist or you're in marketing, this is an opportunity for you, right? People talk about the loneliness economy. They talk about things like DoorDash, right? If you're on your own, we can bring food to your door. They talk about streaming services. They talk about everything that you can do through your app. They even talk about sex robots. Believe it or not, that's a thing, and it's a growth thing. This is all called the loneliness economy. You know what social scientists call that? They call it the economy of misery. The technology is enabling us to do the worst things that we can do from a social capital and community point of view. The reason this matters from a public health point of view, chronic loneliness is really bad for you. It's really bad for your physical health, and it's really, really bad for your mental health. The study that everybody cites, it's been fact-checked a million times, is if you experience chronic loneliness, that is as bad for you as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, difference between the two things, solitude is really good. Solitude is the time on your own that you have freely chosen and you enjoy. Loneliness is time you spend on your own that you haven't chosen and you do not enjoy. Everybody experiences little bits of loneliness, but if you experience it all the time, it's really, really bad for your mental health. My argument is, for at least the minority of people in our society, we're creating settings where they will get to spend lots of time chronically alone. So here we go. This is from February this year. This is the American Psychiatric Association that talks about the physical health threat posed by loneliness. This is a public health problem, right? I love this, the next healthcare frontier. So people talking about, you want to know what's happening next after obesity, COVID, obesity, the next thing we're going to have to worry about is loneliness. It's a huge, huge problem. In fact, the US Surgeon General, who I've grown to love for reasons I'll talk about in a minute, this year put out an advisory about loneliness and about what loneliness is doing. You can trace loneliness as a driver to all sorts of antisocial behaviours, to all sorts of lack of engagement, to all sorts of mental health problems. The root cause underneath those things is actually one of feeling like you don't belong, feeling isolated, feeling that nobody loves you and supports you. Okay, well, I could talk about this all day, but I'm not allowed to, so let's just wrap up quickly. Well, not wrap up quickly, but let me tell you about why it's happening. Does anybody have a clue why this is happening? What's the first thing you think of? Right, of course. That's exactly what you should think about. That's not the problem. It's part of the problem. The problem is much bigger than that. The real problem is that our society is getting old really, really fast. So two demographic, you probably know this backwards because you work in education. There are two overlapping demographic changes in New Zealand that mean New Zealand's population has shifted in ways that most people haven't noticed. We're getting old. New Zealand is now a country of old people. There are more people in New Zealand over 65 than there are under 9, right? Because as we get old and live longer and we have more health span, we're having fewer kids, right? In fact, demographers call it a fertility implosion. Do you guys know what the total fertility rate is? So in a normal population, absent of migration, to get a population that grows, you need a total fertility rate of 2.1, right? That's 2.1 live births for every woman in society, for a couple, and for those that can't have the number. 2.1 is the magic number. New Zealand's at 1.5 or 1.6. So in the absence of migration, New Zealand's population would go backwards. It's exactly the same across the Western world, right? This is global, but this is exactly what's happening in New Zealand. This is the demographic transition that we're experiencing right now, like literally, like in the 2020s, this is what's going on. You don't need to remember that. All you need to remember is this. In Japan this year, sale of adult diapers overtook sale of baby diapers. That's all you need to know, right? Because that's exactly what's going to happen in New Zealand. There'll be a bigger market for adult diapers than there are for baby diapers because people are getting old and they're living longer and we're not having babies, right? What that means is lots and lots of sole person households. But on top of that, sole person households are the fastest growing household type, full stop. Think about everybody you know in your life who lives alone. Sole person households are the fastest growing kind of household in New Zealand. Now, sole person households don't necessarily mean people are going to get lonely, but unless you build communities with strong third places, places that are sticky, places that can bring people together, it's going to help exacerbate it. And then, obviously, and this is why I love the Surgeon General, he's also put out an advisory about the impact of social media on youth. Well worth getting, right? Loneliness is a huge problem. Social media is a huge problem. Now, quick aside, what the research says about social media use is really, really interesting, and it's exactly what you'd expect. There are certain things you need to have well-being, right? You need to be able to connect with other people. You need to have good, strong relationships. You need to have physical activity. You need to do a bunch of stuff. The extent to which social media doesn't crowd any of those out, it doesn't make any difference to your well-being. The extent to which social media stops you meeting people face-to-face, stops you exercising, stops you doing something with purpose, it's really, really bad for your health. It reminds me of, who's old enough to remember when bran was the first superfood in the 80s? Does anybody remember the bran craze? Right, so bran was the first superfood, and everyone went crazy for bran. And in America, they were so nuts for bran, they put it in everything, including toothpaste. And what the research said is, there's nothing special about bran. Bran's not a superfood, except if you eat enough of it, it's really good for you. Because if you eat enough of it, you've got no room to eat the stuff that's really bad for you, right? So the bran crowds out the bad stuff. The extent to which social media crowds out the good stuff, it's problematic. But if you're using social media as well as having a rich life full of social connection, full of being present, full of purpose and activity, it's not going to hurt you at all. The other thing that's going on, this probably has, you probably have noticed this. We're living through a very interesting time in terms of sentiment. Like, it feels like New Zealand's fraying. So one of the questions that gets asked all the time, this is from Roy Morgan, is do you think New Zealand's going in the right direction? Now, it doesn't matter. I'm not talking here about politics at all. But what you get when you look at that question is you move very quickly from a country where most people think, yeah, we're kind of doing okay, to a country where about half the people go, no, we're going in absolutely the wrong direction, right? Whatever that direction is. Interestingly, you see that utterly, so all I need you to see here is the shape of this chart, right? Ditto here. This is confidence in the government. Again, I don't care who the government is. This is confidence in the government and its consumer confidence. And what you can see is the country's just getting a little bit grumpy, right? It's just feeling like it's not what we used to be. So you mix all of those things together, demographic change, along with household change, along with social media change, along with what the hell are we actually doing here? What's our story? I mean, you don't need to do this now, but one of the things we talk about in that tomorrow or Tātahi work is the need for strong leadership and direction. Where the hell's Christchurch going? Like, does anybody actually know what the vision for Christchurch is? Like, who are we going to be in 20 years? What's it going to look like? Who's the leader? Who do we talk to if we want to influence things other than ourselves? Okay, what should we do about it? Anybody got any clues? Anybody want to run for mayor? Right. Well, that in itself, right, is a really important point, isn't it? Because if you look around, a room full of decent, smart people, and none of us want to run for public office. I mean, who does that leave? All right. Oh, well, very good. Okay. Well, let's face it, he couldn't do worse. Yeah. As a psychologist, I actually think if you want to run for public office, you shouldn't be allowed to. Seriously, I think what you need in the world is reluctant police officers and reluctant politicians. Okay, so what should we do about it? Well, the first thing you have to do, this is where the presentation takes a hard left, is you have to realize how biased we all are. And you have to realize that the world isn't quite what you think it is, right? So if you look at these two, have you guys seen this before? Anybody done an undergraduate degree in psychology? All right, well, you can't answer. The rest of you, what do you see when you look at checkerboards A and B? Can't hear you, you're going to have to talk a bit louder. What do you see? Black and white. Right, is that what everybody sees? right? Kind of grey and dark grey and light grey. Is that what everybody sees? Yeah? Yeah. How convinced are you, now I'm serious, like you're all smart people, how convinced are you that A and B are different colours? What does your eyes and your brain tell you? Yep. Yep, seriously. Obviously I'm tricking you, right? But what does it look like? Okay. Hi, Gail.
Hi.
Can you cut out this square A just very carefully with those scissors for me? Don't lose the scissors. Okay, so what Gail's about to discover, and you're all about to discover, is they're identical. You won't believe it until I show you. It's all right, the evidence is coming. Two amazing things are going to happen, right? You're going to look at that and go, no frickin' way. And then when you look back at the slide, it's still going to look different. Okay? The world isn't the way you think it looks. Every time you look at the world, you're seeing it through. Right, now pull that over B. Right, now put it back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pass it around. Yeah, oh wow, it's a cleaner version of what we usually hear. Pass it around. So this is a really important lesson. You're going to forget it. It doesn't matter, right? Every time you look at the world, you interpret the world through a bunch of things you already know. Some that you've learned, some that your culture's taught you, some that your brain uses as shortcuts. All of those things mean the picture that you see inside your head, you think's the only one that matters. That view is called naive realism. That view is the problem we run into every time we deal with a complex policy issue. Go and study naive realism. It will blow your mind. What did I do with you? Where did I put your clicker over here? So this is coming around. Actually, have you still got those scissors? Thanks. You can do it for yourself. Hey, Mark. Can you just cut that one out carefully there? And you can too when you get some spare scissors. I'll bring you one. Honestly, this is the most powerful demonstration of naive realism I can give you. What this should lead to, and it never does, is cognitive humility, right? All of us, when we start thinking about how do we solve problems, we arrive at a solution and we convince ourselves it's a good one, even if it's one that has nuance in it, right? But everything we do is filtered through a picture of the world that we think makes sense and it adds up to us. And we forget that that's just our view of the world. Just pass it around. Everybody's mind's blown? Right. So have you now seen that those two colours are identical? Like you saw them in front of you? Absolutely identical, right? What do they look like up there?
So different.
Yeah. So by the way, this is why psychologists think that eyewitness testimony is worthless. It's so interesting that courts believe eyewitness testimony is credible, because what you see can be utterly... So if you want to know why this works, right? This works because your brain is making a guess, and it's not telling you it's making a guess. What's happening is that cylinder is casting a shadow over the checkerboard. So your brain is trying to subtract that shadow and make sense of the colours. But it's not telling you it's doing it automatically. Your brain gets exposed to about 11 million bits of information every second, and only 30 or 40 of them make it to consciousness. So there's an awful lot of processing of information going on behind the scenes. The reason I showed you that one first, right? You thought it was black, but it's not really, right? Is because then we can talk about this. Right. Who thinks this dress looks blue and black? Can you put a hand up if you think that dress looks blue and black? Who thinks it looks like white and gold, or something like white and gold? Who thinks it looks something else? If I hadn't shown you the checkerboard illusion, who thinks it looks like black and blue? Give me a black and blue. You're a black and blue. If I hadn't shown you the illusion, you go it's black and blue, I go it's white and gold, you think he's an idiot, I think she's clearly got something wrong with it, lovely and charming. But what you should now know, because I've just taught you this, is actually the way that you see something is constructed, and what actually matters is you and I have constructed this in a different way, and there's a really interesting conversation. Do you want to know why we've constructed in different ways? Because your brain's subtracting the overexposed light up to the right, and it's trying to work out, if you take away that light, what colour's the dress. If your brain takes away artificial fluorescent light, the dress looks black and blue. If your brain subtracts sunlight, it looks white and gold. Yeah, here's the bit that breaks my heart, because it looks white and gold to me so much. The photo was taken indoors. What does that mean the light is? Artificial light, which means the dress in real life is? Thank you. I know it hurts. I still think you guys are crazy. But this is this problem, right? We argue all the time over the thing, and we stop to think about why is it that somebody else sees the thing differently to me. Daniel Kahneman, who's one of my intellectual heroes, if you haven't read Thinking Fast and Slow, you should. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics. He's a psychologist. But he makes this beautiful point, right? We can be blind to the obvious, but we can also be blind to our blindness. Think about every argument you've ever had with somebody you love. You're arguing about something that you think's obvious and he or she thinks obvious, and nobody's arguing about the fact that we see it differently, that I see it differently to you and you see it differently to me, which is what we should be arguing about once we realize that what we see and interpret, every framework we ever have, is constructed based on our experience and evolution and a million other things, right? Okay, don't worry, I'm nearly done. The other thing is, of course, your brain works in ways that you don't know about, because your brain didn't evolve to make you really good teachers, right? Your brain evolved to do one thing. What's that? Keep you alive. Your brain evolved to get you to tomorrow, which means your brain lets you make mistakes if they're more likely to keep you alive. Your brain doesn't care about accuracy. Your brain cares about fluency. Let me show you that. What color's the snow? This isn't a trick. What color's the snow? Everybody say it? White. Great. What color are these beautiful dogs? White. Everybody say it? White. Fantastic. What color's this ugly cat? What? What color's this cat? Right, say it. Great. What color's this house? White. What do we call it? White. Fantastic. What color's this coat? Fantastic. What color are these very rare eggs? White. Brilliant. What color is this beautiful shoe? White. Excellent. What color is this t-shirt? White. What do cows drink? Right. I just showed you 10 white images, and then your brain reached for something white, right? That's kind of how advertising works, by the way. But just think about that. All I did was prime you with white images. And some of you who even said milk, I hope some of you who said milk, as you were saying milk, part of your brain was thinking, no, they don't drink milk. Right. Again, this is teaching us about the foibles of being human in cognition, right? None of us are as smart as we think we are, because our brains didn't evolve to make us smart. Our brains evolved to run fast, and that means you get to make lots of mistakes. Our brains are error prone. That's fine. I love this David Foster Wallace. If anybody here has ever finished Infinite Jest, you have absolutely all my respect, because I've had 3 goes at it and I can't get through it. But David Foster Wallace tells this great joke about there's an old goldfish in a goldfish bowl swimming around, and he comes up to some 2 young goldfish and he goes, "Good morning, boys, how's the water?" And the young goldfish say, "What the hell's the water?" Right? We don't know what the water is because we're swimming in it. Another way of saying that is we don't think about our biases very much because we think with our biases, right? And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I just mean that in an unconscious bias sense. Whatever bias you've got, you're thinking with them. And you don't even think about how you got them. We just we're inculcated with them, we were encultured with them, we pick them up from our families and our friends and the people we hang out with. They're all the sum total of the 5 people we hang out with the most, right? Okay, right, so I'm nearly done. Let's go back to loneliness. What do we do about it? I don't have a clue. Seriously, I don't know what we do about it, and it breaks my heart. As a social scientist, I know that the interventions have to be at the level of structure and agency. We have to start designing neighborhoods in a way different to how we do it. We've got to start thinking about workplaces in a completely different way. One of the interesting things about the research we do in Christchurch shows that people who live in the old neighborhoods, who live in Beckenham, Littleton, Cashmere, they love them. They're walkable, they're really nice neighborhoods. The people that live in the new neighborhoods, Wigram, Rolleston, they hate them. Got to drive everywhere. They're terrible things. We design them around cars. It's a disaster. There's a thing called WalkScore, walkscore.com, which will tell you how walkable your neighborhood is. Put your address in it sometime, give it a go. Next time you're looking at buying a house, find a neighborhood that has a really high walk score. It will improve your life and your lives of everybody around it. If you live in a new neighborhood, next time you're driving around, look around and see how few places there are to sit and linger. Like we don't build them into neighborhoods anymore because we're worried about homeless people. I love this notion, though. Not many people wave, but almost everybody waves back. At the level of agency, what you can do is you can actually start talking to people more, reaching out to people more. And if you want to read something about that, have a look at this book called The Power of Strangers by Joe Keown, because I think it's a really nice start. One of the things it talks about is one of the reasons we don't often talk to people we don't know is we're scared of rejection and we think that they won't like us. The research shows that they will love it. Everybody's waiting for somebody else to start the conversation. As Nick Epley says, not many people wave, but everybody waves back. My plea for you is start being the person that waves. That's it.